daughter's condition?
Kaylin was born with multiple congenital bone birth defects.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Lester Holt.
Good day, everyone. We're coming on the air with breaking news. An arrest has been made in the death of George Floyd, the African-American man who died in police custody in Minneapolis earlier this week. Right now, the Hennepin County, Minnesota attorney Mike Freeman is speaking to reporters.
Murder. We are in the process of continuing to review the evidence. There may be subsequent charges later. I failed to share with you a detailed complaint will be made available to you this afternoon. I didn't want to wait any longer to share the news that he's in custody and has been charged with murder.
What about the other 3 officers involved?
The investigation is ongoing. We felt it appropriate to focus on the most dangerous perpetrator. I must say that this case has moved with extraordinary speed. This conduct, this criminal action, took place on Monday evening, May 25th, Memorial Day. I'm speaking to you at 1 o'clock on Friday, May 29th. That's less than 4 days. That's extraordinary. We have never charged a case in that kind of time frame, and we can only charge a case when we have sufficient admissible evidence to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. As of right now, we have that.
Mike, yesterday you asked.
Give her a follow-up. Go ahead.
Many people, including the mayor, have said that any other citizen with the video evidence available would have been arrested and held while awaiting charges earlier. Why didn't that happen in this case?
We have charged this case as quickly as sufficient admissible evidence to charge it has been investigated and presented to us.
Mike, you were saying yesterday that people should be patient or this is going to take time. What's changed since yesterday and this morning or this afternoon now we're seeing murder charges against Chauvin?
Fair question. We have now been able to put together the evidence that we need. Even as late as yesterday afternoon, we didn't have all that we needed. We have now found it, and we felt a responsibility to charge this as soon as possible. Paul?
Yeah, Mike, what was the final piece? Was it,
no.
Do you now have some back from the mute?
Folks, I'm not going to talk specifically about this piece of evidence or that piece of evidence. You will see, and you all are veterans, I can only talk about what's in the complaint. You will see in the complaint the evidence and put it all together. We needed to have it all. Now, let me just quickly say we have evidence. We have the citizens' cameras, video, the horrible, horrific, terrible thing that we've all seen over and over again. We have the officer's body-worn camera. We have statements from some witnesses. We have a preliminary report from the medical examiner. We have discussions with an expert. All of that has come together, so we felt in our professional judgment it was time to charge, and we have so done.
Based on the other officer's role in the video, what criminal statutes could apply to those officers if it's not murder?
I'm not going to speculate today of the other officers. They are under investigation. I anticipate charges, but I'm not going to get into that. Today we're talking about former Officer Chauvin, which we believe has met the standards to be charged, and that's what we have done.
Mike, I've seen you charge other cases.
Whoa.
How closely did you look at the second-degree statutes, either intentional or unintentional, that on the surface seem to fit this, the videotape evidence we've all seen?
We have looked very closely at all statutes. This is what we've charged now. Investigation is ongoing. We have more discussions to do with our experts. This is the same charges that we made when we charged former Minneapolis police officer Mohammed Noor. The exact same third-degree charge and manslaughter charge.
Mike,
I've seen you charge cases faster. I've seen you charge cases faster than 4 days. Are you saying that you've charged, this is the fastest you've ever charged a police officer?
This is by far the fastest we've ever charged a police officer. Okay. Normally these cases can take 9 months to a year. We have to charge these cases very carefully because we have a difficult burden of proof. And let me just say something about that. We entrust our police officers to use certain amounts of force to do their job, to protect us. They commit a criminal act if they use this force unreasonably. We have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. The Hennepin County Attorney's Office is one of the few prosecutor offices in this country in the last 5 years to successfully prosecute a police officer for murder. And we did that on behalf of Justine Damon. Okay, that's unusual. We know how to do this. We have a very veteran prosecutor group, aided by a very veteran investigator group at the BCA. On top of that, we've had great cooperation from the FBI and from United States Attorney Erica McDonald. And she may have some things to share with you soon, but she does that on her own timetable. I want to say to you that I'm very pleased about that level of cooperation, which frankly, I will say to you, doesn't necessarily happen in other jurisdictions, according to my friends and the national prosecutors. One last one.
That's a border investigation. That took months, close to a year. This takes days. Did public outrage play a role in the speed of this investigation?
I'm not insensitive to what's happened in the streets. My own home has been picketed regularly. My job is to do it only when we have sufficient evidence. We have it today. Mohammed Noor was a very difficult case. We didn't have the kind of videotape we need. And we didn't, and there was all sorts of other evidence that took us a long time. We do our level best to charge each case when we have the evidence to do it. But we cannot, and I will not allow us to charge a case until it's ready.
Were you waiting?
This case is now ready, and we have charged it.
Mike, do you want to make clear that the complaint has not yet been signed, it's in process, and when it's done, when it's ready, we'll...
Good, thank you. Let me say on, so you have it. The complaint has been completed, and it is being processed now, and the signed copy will be made available to you today.
Where was the autopsy?
Okay,
Have you given a statement to the investigators or the other three?
That's all for now. Thanks, everybody.
That's Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman announcing that charges are in the works now. 2 charges against former officer Derek Chauvin of manslaughter and 3rd-degree murder in the case of George Floyd. There is a picture of him. He is the officer who was seen with his knee on the neck of Mr. Lloyd on Monday. The prosecutors saying that they have moved with extraordinary speed to file these charges. He also noted when asked about the other 3 officers that we see in many of these tapes that they remain under investigation. He said he anticipates charges. He also hinted that the feds may be making an announcement of their own on their timetable at some point. But what we can tell you is state charges now moving forward against former officer Chauvin, again, manslaughter and 3rd-degree murder. Gabe Gutierrez is in the streets of Minneapolis, where fire is still smoldering from overnight. Gabe, how has that word circulated today?
Hi, Lester. Well, early indications are that this is very welcome news in this community that saw so much devastation overnight. Again, still questions remaining about what will happen to those other 3 officers, but as you mentioned, charges anticipated there. Right now, authorities had been putting out hotspots in this area. This block, multiple buildings had burned. A restaurant and another building also went up in flames. A roof had just collapsed a short time ago. Now, Lester, I do want to point out, this is the State Patrol. They have set up a perimeter here. They did so early this morning. That is very different from what happened last night, where there was virtually no police presence here. Many members of this community were frustrated by that. Earlier today, the governor had blamed local leaders for not enough of a plan to have, and the police precinct here was breached and burned. The question tonight, will the arrest today be enough to de-escalate the violence here? Many members of this community want to know whether there will be another night of violence here or whether the increased police presence and the new charges will do anything to change that. Lester?
Yeah, the county attorney making that announcement of the charges against former officer Chauvin today. And of course, we note there were the 3 other officers. The calls have been for an arrest, for prosecution, for murder charges. Interesting that the county attorney noting that this had moved with extraordinary speed. Certainly the arrest was 4 days after the alleged crime, but in terms of the filing of the charges, the report would be that the claim would be that they have moved with extraordinary speed. I want to go to Pete Williams right now, our justice correspondent in our Washington newsroom. Pete, third-degree murder, manslaughter, how would those figure in the case of what we've seen so far?
A third-degree murder is an unusual statute. Most states don't have it. In Minneapolis, it means killing without intent, but acting with a depraved state of mind. That's the term used in the law, without regard for human life. The lesser charge is manslaughter. That's an unintentional killing. Almost every state has some kind of killing without intent. Almost every state has that kind of statute. And, you know, Lester, all along, we thought that the state would be the first to file the charges, not the federal government. Now, the federal government may file a civil rights charge, but the problem has always been in these cases, and you think back to Trayvon Martin, Michael Garner, Michael Brown, Amadou Diallo, Sean Bell, any of these high-profile police killings, it's very difficult for the Justice Department to get a conviction because you have to prove two things under the federal statute if they ever decide to file charges. One is that the officer acted inappropriately, used unauthorized force. That seems pretty straightforward here. But you have to prove that he knew what he was doing was wrong, and that's where these cases often go south. So the Justice Department may act here, but we always thought, Lester, that the state would go first. They just have many more statutes at their disposal than the federal government does.
All right, Pete, thanks. We should note that we are waiting to hear from President Trump. He had previously scheduled a news conference for around this time. We expect to go there, and we would expect he will make comments on these latest developments in Minneapolis, as he has tweeted about them and made other comments. White House correspondent Kristen Welker has been following some of the president's response. Kristen, some of his comments have been characterized as not helpful in the community of Minneapolis right now.
That's absolutely right, Lester. This is a real leadership test for President Trump. He's obviously watching what is happening in Minneapolis at this hour quite closely. We know that he did speak with his attorney general and urged for a swift investigation into exactly what happened. But as you note, the president has come under scrutiny for his handling of this crisis, including a recent tweet, Lester. And I'll read you the tweet in question earlier today, tweeting, "These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Just spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the military is with him all the way. Any difficulty and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts." And it's the last part of the tweet, Lester, that has a lot of people criticizing President Trump. They say that it sounds a lot like something that we heard back in 1967 from a Miami police chief who was widely regarded as being racist. We put that question to the White House. Why did President Trump use that specific language? No response, but the White House really doubling down on this quote by President Trump, posting it on the official White House account. Now, this has opened up the president to a broad range of criticism, including from his Democratic rival Joe Biden, who's accused the president of fomenting violence. Former President Barack Obama saying that this shouldn't be happening in 2020. And of course, it also comes against the backdrop of his handling of this global pandemic, Lester. And so a real leadership test for President Trump. He's going to undoubtedly get a number of questions about this, about what next steps should look like, about what the role of the federal government will be moving forward. Again, we are anticipating President Trump in the Rose Garden. We expect that his focus may also be on foreign policy today, but this will be at the forefront undoubtedly, Lester.
All right, Kristen Welker, thank you. And Andrea Mitchell has been watching all this for us and how it's impacting the 2020 race. And it really gets back to what Kristen was just speaking of, Andrea, this idea of leadership. There is clear contrast for folks to be able to note today.
Indeed, Joe Biden going online and giving a very emotional statement, as Kristen was just referring to, talking about 400 years of racism, that every American has to stand up. And this as he is, of course, considering whom he would choose as vice president. And one of those contenders, the former presidential candidate Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota, has been very much on the spot. I talked to her about an hour ago on MSNBC, and she has fiercely defended her record. She has had the job of Hennepin County attorney that Mike Freeman, you just saw bringing those charges against Derek Chauvin. That was her previous job before she went into the Senate. She was elected in 2006. And she has been under fire because that same police officer was under investigation for the fatal stabbing, fatal shooting of a stabbing suspect. And he was not indicted by a grand jury, but she has pointed out she was already in the Senate. It was not her job. It was not on her watch. It was her successor's watch when it went to the grand jury. She's also been criticized because there were 24 police fatal shootings, fatal cases on her watch, but she said in those years it was up to grand juries, not to the local prosecutor, to deal with those cases. But this has become very much an issue. She was emotional in her response. She's calling for Attorney General William Barr to investigate, as he is investigating this case, and she is saying that she's been out in the streets talking to the officials there. She's in Minnesota, obviously. She was there last night, but this has certainly raised questions as to whether Joe Biden, under great pressure to have an African-American woman as his running mate, will now be under more pressure now as this has become, once again, tragically, a major debate in America.
All right, Andrea, and as again we noted, we're waiting to hear from President Trump, who is expected to step out in the Rose Garden for a news conference shortly. Let me go back to Kristen for a moment. I understand there's some clarification from the president about some of his words.
As we were speaking, Lester, President Trump tweeted out a clarification of his remarks when the shooting starts. Let me just read you his tweets in full, because this is from the president moments ago. Looting leads to shooting, he says, and that's why a man was shot and killed in Minneapolis on Wednesday night. Or look at what just happened in Louisville with 7 people shot. I don't want this to happen, and that's what the expression put out last night means. It was spoken as a fact, not as a statement. It's very simple. Nobody should have any problem with this other than the haters and those looking to cause trouble on social media. Honor the memory of George Floyd. So for the president's supporters, this will be the type of clarification that they say should turn the page on that type of language. But for his critics, they'll say that he's the president and he should be aware of the history and the language that it evokes. But again, Lester, bottom line, the question becomes, what will the president do next? To what extent will he address what we have witnessed in Minneapolis when he speaks at the Rose Garden? We know that former President Obama, in the wake of the Ferguson riots, for example, it took him about 4 days to come out and address the situation. What will President Trump have to say, as this is, again, a leadership test for him like none other, Lester?
All right, Kristen, I want to go back to Pete Williams right now. I understand there's been a statement from Attorney General Barr.
Well, we were just saying a moment ago that the understanding has always been that the state officials would go first, and he's now confirming what we had been told privately. He calls the video harrowing to watch and deeply disturbing. He notes that the FBI and the Justice Department are working together in the investigation. He acknowledges that the process is going along quickly. The state's charging decisions will be made first, he says, and I'm confident justice will be served. So, you know, this is we've seen these things before where we've got the FBI and local authorities both investigating, the state as well, in addition to the Minneapolis Police Department. But the local authorities go first because they have so many more legal options to pursue. The federal government's option here is basically under the civil rights law, and that's the one I was talking about earlier, that is so hard to prove. But the fact that the FBI is also involved in the investigation obviously gives you a whole separate set of eyes and ears on the case, and that can help the state officials as well. So, you know, in these cases, it's not just that the FBI gathers information and keeps it to itself. So whatever it gathers that could be relevant to the state investigation can be shared with them. So in terms of investigative manpower, it's a real force multiplier, Lester.
All right, Pete Williams, thanks very much. We want to go back to Minneapolis right now. Smoke still wafting through the southern part of that city after the second night of clashes and looting and fires being set to buildings. Our Gabe Gutierrez is there. Gabe, what steps are being taken in terms of policing to try and prevent a repeat of this?
Yeah, Lester, that's right. Well, we expect tonight to be very different because after midnight tonight, you heard earlier today, the governor talked about stepping in and state resources coming in. As I mentioned earlier, this is the state patrol, officers in riot gear. Again, earlier yesterday evening, there was no such police presence, at least when the police precinct was evacuated. If we walk just a little bit over here, Lester, you can see that this continues, this line of officers continues all the way over here, and you can see community residents actually beginning to clean up the devastation from yesterday. This is actually the first time we're seeing this, and it's quite wonderful to see young people, community members coming in here and cleaning up the devastation from yesterday. They say that the community members we've spoken with say that this is not what South Minneapolis is, and that they worked very, very hard to get this community back up over the last couple of years, and they're heartbroken to see this. So their hope is that tonight there will not continue to be violence. You see the way this looks like. Community members describe it as a war zone. More officers. The Minnesota National Guard is here, and the governor is promising that tonight will be different. It should be interesting to see how many protesters show up tonight and whether those new charges make any difference in the tension here at this point, Lester.
All right, Gabe, thank you very much. As we noted, we've been watching a couple of spinning plates, including the president's news conference. That not happening on schedule. We'll continue to monitor that. But we do want to remind you of the headline right now. Former Officer Derek Chauvin of the Minneapolis PD has now been charged with manslaughter and third-degree murder. That paperwork, we're told, is being filed even as we speak, and we expect a full readout on it here shortly. But that's the headline. The 3 other officers remain under investigation. The county attorney says he anticipates charges. So we're going to go off here right now. We will come back as soon as the president steps out before reporters. In the meantime, I'm Lester Holt, NBC News, New York.
Hours. I'm John Hawkins of Hawk Law.